I used to play with my name as a kid, repeating it over and over. Each repetition formed a series of concentric circles, taking me further and further away from the nucleus of myself, the microcosm Julia somehow stood for. Years later, a simple poem by Alejandra Pizarnik revived this peculiar feeling. Alejandra, Alejandra, underneath am I, Alejandra. I invite you all to play with your own name in this way. Make the poem yours. Observe yourself from the outside through a word, your name. Our name is usually the first word we learn to write. We rehearse it, Crayola held tight in our fist. We show it to the adults with pride. Reading Elena Ferrante's essay in the margins, I was struck by a description of the way a little girl writes her name, asking to be enthusiastically recognized in those letters. It resonated with me because words have always been my way of accessing myself amidst the chaos of life. When I was a little girl, I used to journal to keep an account of my life. But as I matured, my motivations changed. It became a way to get rid of the racing thoughts that spun through my mind. They acquired a presence in the stillness of the page where I could confront and examine them. My journal became a record of my inner life rather than of external events. Through writing, through reading, I've lived very closely with stories. And I know that stories are fundamentally ways of confronting tension. There's the beginning, where a problem arises or a question emerges. The middle, a wrestle with it that culminates in the climax. And the end, when the problem is resolved and an answer to the question is found or peace is made with the lack of an answer. Every story starts with a collision with the world, something that perplexes me about it. I write in order to give meaning to the world. But most of the time, what I seek to give meaning to is my own life, the course it takes, why I feel the way I feel. Life can feel like a constant exposure to images we store in our minds, a rotating carousel, as Patricia Hempel describes. I often feel stuck in a spinning carousel of thoughts, of images, of collisions with the world. My journal is my way of making the carousel come to a stop. I'm going to share with you an excerpt from my journal, of the less private kind, of course, in which I speak directly to my journal. My thoughts become hypothetical letters to you until I can sit down to write. Sitting down to write is not easy. It requires something that tends to be in short supply. Ample time for a conversation with myself. My time is filled by conversations with others. And when I have time for myself, too often, I turn away. A whole day can easily pass by in which the carousel spun round and round, ignored at the back of my mind. The longer that it is left ignored, the fiercer the assault of its flashing images becomes. Psychology has a term for this: inhibition, the long-term avoidance of emotional issues. It's considered a low-level stressor that over time can have devastating consequences on your health. In one study, it was found that from a sample of 200 office workers, undisclosed childhood trauma was linked to higher levels of hypertension and cancer. But without needing to refer to science, We already widely understand the importance of disclosure. Let me ask you a question. If you're helping someone you love navigating a crisis, what are the first responses that come to mind? At least for me, they tend to run along the lines of, do you have someone to talk to? I'm here to listen. What do these responses have in common? Externalization. When we externalize our inner conflicts, we get the distance needed to weave them into a story, to convey where we are now based on where we've been and how this maps out into the future. Or, like I would like to say, cultivate intimacy with ourselves. High school seniors who practice this by reflecting on their struggles and finding positive meaning in them score higher on indexes of psychological well-being, which is wonderful. But this finding refers to stories told to others about oneself. The depth of these stories will depend on how much the listener is willing to listen. Not only that, but you may feel ashamed and leave out certain details. Why leave such an intimate process in the hands of another? This is why I believe in the power of journaling. Journaling takes place in solitude. The page acts as a radiography of your inner life. There are no impressions to uphold, no running hourglass of patience or attention. The leading researcher in this field, Dr. James W. Penbreaker, conducted an experiment in which participants were asked to write about the most distressing experiences of their lives. Each day, they made more and more sense of what had happened, with increases in words like understand, realize, because. Stories were beginning to emerge. Knowing that stories confront tension, this makes a great deal of sense. But I only recently discovered that a story's way of confronting tension, with its beginning, its middle, and its end, not only applied to literature, but also to my own journaling practice. I was at a peculiar intersection of events, rereading Anne Frank's diary and struggling to justify my own journaling practice, knowing that no one would ever read what I wrote. But reading about Anne Frank's frustration to define herself amidst conflicting identities, I found it curious how people tend to focus on the paradox of her diary, that she never imagined the universal impact it would have, that it would be published in countries all over the world. But I wasn't drawn to contemplate that impact. I was drawn to contemplate its original impact, the way it served as a lifeline for someone seeking to understand herself in the midst of a brutal reality. It allowed her to have agency over her story at a time in which so much was out of her control. One of the authors I admire most, Joan Didion, promotes journaling, promotes cultivating intimacy with your past, despite the discomfort of writing something no one will read. I think we are well advised to keep on nodding terms with the people we used to be, whether we find them attractive company or not. Otherwise, they turn up unannounced and surprise us, come hammering on the mind's door at 4 a.m. of a bad night and demand to know who deserted them, who betrayed them, who is going to make amends. Who is going to make amends? Who but yourself can make amends, armed with pen and paper, studying yourself with the distance words provide, taking what has happened and making something from it. Because that's what stories do. They take raw material and transform it. The raw material is life, the carousel of images, of thoughts, of collisions with the world. Through writing, through stories, we create understanding, we create meaning, we create beauty. I'm reminded of the game I used to play when I repeated my name and beheld my identity from afar. Words remove you from yourself, and in doing so, they grant you the power to access yourself. By honing this power, you not only ride the carousel of life, but you become the creator of its stories. Thank you.